as I've mentioned in previous events like this, we're doing more and more of these kinds of events where we're engaging people from the corporate side and from the policy side. And so to engage with them as a school, I think, is a really important and exciting thing. Now, from a personal note, I've always admired IBM both for their work on corporate responsibility and corporate citizenship, but also for their work on China. This has been a company that has been not only at the forefront of really deeply thinking about how to leverage the global economy and China specifically, but also a company that I think in an amazing way has remade itself several times over. I mean, to think about the issue of creative destruction and think about what the company was like 30 years ago, and then how it was transformed under Gerstner in the 90s. And then ultimately, right after that transformation, to kind of take another leap into a new set of business practices, I just think is an unbelievable story to be told in its own right. But then to focus that in on what it means to be one of the most powerful corporate citizens in the world and really focus on citizenship as an aspect of what it means to be a corporation, I just think it's a tremendous thing for the organization, and it's a tremendous conversation to be having. The one final note that I'll just make on that is that I love the language that IBM uses on this as being about citizenship, because it's a broader concept in my view than corporate social responsibility, and so it really kind of thinks about the issue that corporations are very, very special and favored citizens in global capitalist economies, and so it's incumbent on them to actually think broadly about these concepts, and so I admire IBM for doing that. We're very lucky today to have Stan Litow, who's the Vice President of Corporate Citizenship and Corporate Affairs and President of the IBM International Foundation. So without further ado, Stan, please.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come here to talk with you, and no PowerPoints. I've actually prepared something I've been working on to lay out how the history of this company, and this year we're celebrating IBM's centennial. IBM is 100 years old. On June 15th, we are going to have all of our employees worldwide to be involved in a corporate day of service, 400,000 or more people all around the world on the 15th. And then on the 16th, we will meet to mark the 100th anniversary of the incorporation of the International Business Machine Company. So I've thought a lot about that, its connection to citizenship, global transformation, and especially its relevance to future business leaders, which is why I'm going to a number of business schools to talk to students about our future and their future. So number one, it's tough for any organization to be around for 100 years, as I can imagine that you would understand, and especially a company that thinks of itself as being involved in innovation, because innovations in some instances come and they go, and hard to sustain yourself over a long period of time. But this is really not only a discussion about the past, it's a conversation really about the future. So let me start with some things from the history and the past of the company. Because we've been going through the archives, as one would imagine, when you are 100 years old, and finding things out about the history of the company. In 1962, Thomas Watson Jr., who was the second chairman of the company and the son of the founder, stood before a lectern probably a little bit like this one, maybe a little bit more grandiose at that point, at Columbia. It was the 50th anniversary of IBM, and he was invited to offer his thoughts to the future leaders at that point in the early 1960s. And he began with a striking statistic. He said that of the top 25 industrial corporations in the United States in the early 1900s, only 2 remained active major corporations by 1961, and IBM, was one of them. And he used that as an opportunity to say, and I'll quote him, "Figures like these help to remind us that corporations are expendable and that success at best is an impermanent achievement which can always slip out of hand. When you think about the great companies in the early part of the century, 20th century, the great companies by the 60s, and here we are now 50 years after Watson spoke at that point at Columbia, and of the top 25 companies of the Fortune 500, when he gave his lecture, only 2 survive today, and IBM is one of those 2. So a little sense of the fact that over this history, companies come and companies go. Powerful companies, seemingly that will last forever, really don't. And it's because of competition, and it's because of some, I think, very significant aspects of a company that allow it to survive. And first, I think, is the ability to change, and the ability to change rapidly. And that's not only a lesson about a company. It's about any enterprise. It's actually an important lesson about individuals. Because if you don't have the capacity to change and change quickly in response to a whole host of instances, very often you are left out of the opportunity or the wave of change. So change is critically important. But at the same time, I think for an entity to survive over a long term, it has to identify those things about that enterprise that could not and should not change, and that's about values and corporate character. And at IBM, the values of the company, which were particularly important to its founder, Tom Watson Sr., its second CEO, Tom Watson Jr., and important today, values about trust and personal responsibility. It's an innovation company who believes in innovation for its clients, but a corporate value is also about innovation that matters for the world, and being willing to understand and internalize the importance of using your innovation in a broader kind of context. So I think in terms of survival over a long period of time, for an individual, for a corporation, for a university, change, the ability to embrace, understand, respond, and increase the rate and the ability to respond rapidly to change. But second, it's about values, and these values that don't change, and that they allow you as an entity to survive over a long period of time. So that's what I think is important about surviving for a long period of time. And I'll take you through some short history of IBM to get a sense of how these innovations and values transition over a long period of time. This is a company that started off building clocks, making clocks, and then a variety of other timing devices, and then electric typewriters, and then moving on to hardware, and then software, and then services. So it's a company that's had a very diverse and changed history, as the dean talked about earlier, the ability to change itself and transform itself, and do some very exciting and great things. In my tenure at IBM, a Blue Gene computer beat Garry Kasparov at chess. That was a pretty important activity. It was important, it wasn't only about a game, it also talked about information infrastructure, the Blue Gene computer that then became a critically important supercomputing device that's fueled some very, very important advances in healthcare and the environment and a variety of other ways. And you just recently perhaps saw on television the IBM Watson computer play Jeopardy against 2 Jeopardy champions, and that's an innovation. But that also, while it was a game that was on television for 3 days, the innovation technology behind it is particularly significant and important. It's this deep Q&A, natural language, very powerful computer that's able to actually think and answer questions. And when you think about the advance and the opportunity for a device like that, it's not searching the web, it's actually thinking. 250 million pages of data and information and encyclopedia information was fed into Watson. And then over a 3.5-year period, after a millions and millions of dollars worth of investment, it was able to play Jeopardy. What else could it do? It could assess and evaluate whether or not a long answer question is accurate on a essay test. And perhaps it could transform how you test against standards and free us from multiple choice test questions. As a former deputy chancellor of schools in New York City, I can tell you that when you set standards high, if you dumb them down through multiple choice test questions, you're not going to get the right results in education. What else could it do? It could be a diagnostic tool for people who don't have access to a doctor. Instead of 250 million pages worth of encyclopedia data, feed it all the information from medical textbooks and have people in Africa or Asia or Latin America who don't have access to a doctor, and perhaps they could get the same kind of high quality diagnostic that somebody who does have access to a doctor could get, and they could get it for free. Perhaps it could be your 911, 311 systems that provide emergency response to people who are currently laboring with very, very high error rates. So the technology and the transition of the technology is particularly important. It's important now, but it was important in the history. In the 1930s, here we are in Washington, we passed a piece of legislation called Social Security. The government had no infrastructure to be able to operate and manage the Social Security system. They invited the IBM company in, and IBM designed, developed, and managed Social Security for the US government. Going through the IBM archives, I found some film of Frances Perkins, the first female cabinet secretary in the United States of America. She was the labor secretary. And at the 25th anniversary of Social Security, she said, and I quote, "There would be no Social Security without IBM." That's a good example. I also found in the files the documentation from Mr. Watson encouraging other corporations to help found the funding base for the NAACP. And that was something that was particularly important at a critical point in time. He believed passionately in civil rights. So passionately that in the 1950s, IBM opened a manufacturing plant in Lexington, Kentucky. It became Lexmark Computers. It opened in the mid-1950s. It was the first integrated manufacturing plant below the Mason-Dixon line in the United States of America. And he said as a precondition of opening this plant in Lexington, Kentucky, that the plant would be an integrated plant. There was no Civil Rights Act. There were no integrated industrial activities going on in Kentucky, but the IBM plant opened as an integrated plant, and it resulted in the integration of the schools in Lexington, Kentucky before Brown versus Board of Education was being implemented. So that's a sense of how a company in its history could use its values to be able to make a statement and lead, perhaps, governmental action and societal action. In the early 1960s, a president of the United States made a speech about putting a man on the moon. NASA had never built a rocket. The US government had never had a successful space flight on that level. And it needed intellectual ability, it needed engineering capability, it needed science and technology capability, and again, just as in the instance of Social Security, invited a team of people in from IBM to work in full partnership with NASA on that moonshot. So those are examples. In the 1960s, IBM opened a plant in Bedford-Stuyvesant. There's communications between the CEO of the company and then Senator from New York, Robert Kennedy, about the importance of opening a plant in Bedford-Stuyvesant in a largely poor African-American neighborhood, and it began a period of about 25 years of IBM support for employment and training facilities around the United States. In 1996, discussion around education was stalled in the US. There were governors who were taking criticism from the right and from the left. Only 11 states had academic standards. The discussion about education had stalled, and a CEO of a company called a National Education Summit, my former boss, Lou Gerstner, at IBM, the President of the United States, 48 governors, CEOs came to IBM, and the result was, within a 2-year period, 49 states set academic standards, and today we have the Common Core standards being implemented by Achieve, the organization that Gerstner chaired and helped create in 1996 to be able to focus the attention of K-12 in the US on standards. And a decade later, in 2007, IBM created what we call the corporate version of the Peace Corps, the largest effort to involve business leaders working in team assignments in the developing world. So that's a little bit about the history, and I hope when we talk about the history of the company, you can see the fusing of the business goals and the social or societal goals and the importance of citizenship. And it is critically important, and I'll return to that in a minute, but if you go back to the history in the US, you know that we had the benefit in the early part of the 20th century of some great industrial leaders. Andrew Carnegie, John Rockefeller, Henry Ford, and they became great philanthropists. The Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, the Rockefeller philanthropies. But their philanthropies had nothing to do with how they ran their businesses. They ran their businesses as successful businesses in whatever way they could to make as much personal wealth as they could. And at the end of the day, they set up philanthropic organizations to send checks, to do things that were vitally important in society. And those are important philanthropies, and their wealth has been critically important in doing a lot of important things, but it was separate from how they ran their business. And that was okay, I think, across the United States at that point in time. It just increasingly, as the 20th century wore on, was no longer acceptable for a business to operate in whatever way it could to make it the most money possible for a founder of the company. Americans and people around the world began to look at corporations and say, no, I want to know how you make your money. And I want to understand what the corporation is willing to do or prepared to do for society. And in the middle of the 20th century and moving on into the 1960s and the early 1970s, the expectation was that a corporation would share some of its profits by giving back into communities. And then people began to expect that a corporation would look at its labor practices, it would look at its environmental practices, it would look at what's happening in your supply chain, it might look at your financial transparency, it might look at your corporate governance structure, and gradually, as the 20th century began to mature and moving towards the end of it, people began to expect corporate social responsibility. And that it wasn't enough just for somebody to have their own business practices whatever way they wanted, and the expectation was that people were going to be held to a higher standard. Now that's not to say that every company lived up to that standard. You know, you teach all the examples here of companies that fell short, and in some instances far short of that goal of being a good corporate citizen. But for IBM, the ability to change and the core values of the company allowed the company to embrace corporate citizenship and understand how important it was, even when the company went through a very serious, almost near-death financial experience in the early 1990s. It didn't stop having an important understanding about corporate citizenship. We've been releasing an environmental report at the IBM company for the last 40 years. About 5 or 6 years ago, we created something called the Electronics Industry Code of Conduct, so that our suppliers, our supply chain will live up to the same kind of environmental practices, labor practices, things about child welfare, and other issues that the company would on its own. So it's no longer acceptable for a company to mind its own business the standards are much higher. So now the question is, if social responsibility is so critically important to IBM as a company, how do we think about it? How do we operate? How do we act on it? And the most important asset that a company like IBM has is its business, information technology and innovation, and its employees, 400,000 or more people across 170 different countries. Almost 190,000 of them are engineers. They have a lot of skills. They have a lot of ability. We invest $6 billion a year in research, more than any other company on the planet. So the capability to innovate through our research laboratories, example of Watson or the Space Shot or things like that, how do we take that technology, that innovation, and the time and talent of our employees, and how do we apply it against some of the most challenging civic challenges that face society? And the way that we do it is each year we take a look at what is significant and important in the research laboratories, what are the critical social problems, and we innovate by putting them together and trying to develop critical solutions that make a difference in the world, and then devote the same kind of management expertise we would to a business problem to try to bring it to scale, assess and evaluate the results, make the modifications, and bring a broader set of solutions to society. I'll give you a few examples. In technology innovation, what are we able to develop? Innovative voice recognition technology. You see it in your life. You turn on the car, and the car recognizes your voice. Some refrigerators recognize your voice. You make a telephone call, and it recognizes your voice. The voice technology researchers at IBM are premier. They're as good as it gets. We took them and found some of the best literacy teachers that we could find. We brought them together in the research labs of IBM and in classrooms around the United States, and we created an online tool built around voice recognition that could help teach a non-literate child how to read. It's called Reading Companion. And last year it taught 168,000 non-literate children around the world to read. And we're in the process of trying to bring that to scale. The evaluation results are incredibly encouraging. There are schools here in Washington that are using it, in New York, in South Africa, in Brazil, in China, in Eastern Europe, and it has a great capability to address a critical issue, and that's literacy. Grid technology. Grid technology allows you to take the unused cycle time on an individual PC and collect it with other PCs and create a powerful supercomputing device. And about 5 years ago, we created something called World Community Grid. And if I would encourage everyone in the audience, it's worldcommunitygrid.org. And when you walk away from your PC or your device, all of the power on that device can go to World Community Grid. We now have over 1.7 million PCs on World Community Grid. And World Community Grid is now the fourth most powerful supercomputer in the world. So where does that power go? It goes to Scripps Institute for their cancer studies. It goes for AIDS research. It goes to do a study at the University of Washington on rice DNA to try to create a stronger strain of rice to address world hunger. It goes to a university in South Africa to create a new climate model for Africa to help drive economic opportunity and economic activity on the continent. And as more people sign up for World Community Grid, it gets more powerful. In a year, it could be the most powerful supercomputer in the world. And it could be able to give the equivalent of multi-million dollars worth of computing power to any researcher who has an idea that's worthy of the research opportunity and getting this free computing power. Automatic language technology. Automatic language translation technology is used in commercial instances. We developed it for education use to create bilingual email. There are teachers who speak English. There are parents who only speak Spanish. Why should a teacher not be able to communicate with a parent simply because of a language difficulty? Working with a group called Maidan, we created high-quality automatic language translation English to Arabic. And it was used extensively during the crisis in the Middle East, the Maidan project. So that investment in research, which the company uses to fuel its business solutions for its clients, is the same technology that can drive improvements in social enterprise around the United States and around the world. Now, in terms of what we do, we like to say it's not checkbook philanthropy. We're not a bank. We don't just write checks. It's a generous company, and we do make a lot of contributions. In 2010, the level of contribution is about $190 million, but about 2/3 of it is technology and talent. And it's not off the shelf, so the amount of money that's cash is relatively modest, and it's usually cash that's combined with the technology and the talent to produce significant results. And we try to look at what are the results. We evaluate and assess the results. So no company would invest $6 billion a year in research without looking at the results. You wouldn't invest in advertising or marketing without looking at the results. You wouldn't look at anything that involves significant corporate expenditures without investing money to figure out what's the return on investment, and why would you do that in the area of citizenship? So when we look at our citizenship investments, we look at the results there too. So if we're investing in developing new technologies to solve critical problems, we evaluate and assess how many patents did we get? How many of those technology solutions found their way into other solutions that could be productized for clients? We have more patents than any other company on the planet, and many of the intellectual capabilities and patents not only resulted from business activity, but they resulted from civic activity. We also believe very strongly that a strong corporate citizen is a better company and is more likely to get the best talent to come to work for us and to stay with the company. And we have examined what are the results of the people who are involved and engaged in citizenship activity. Does it improve their performance? Does it build their skills? Are they more likely to come to work for the company? Are they more likely to stay at work for the company? We are involved in a competition over talent, and citizenship activity is a critical component of that competition for talent. And why would one collect a premier reputation in corporate citizenship? How would it provide economic value to the company? There are two independent ranking systems, Series and Covalence. They look at over 700 or 800 companies worldwide, and they rank you from 1 to 800. IBM ranked number 1 on Series, number 1 on Covalence. And what was the result of that? There's about $1 trillion controlled by socially responsible investment funds. And they have a choice to make about what stock they're going to buy. Are they going to buy the stock of a company that is a strong business performer? Yes. But if they're not a strong social performer and a business performer, they will invest their dollars elsewhere. So we have been able to track year by year, based upon our civic and social performance or citizenship performance, we've been able to watch increased investment from socially responsible investment funds investing in the IBM company, and that is a direct benefit to your shareholders. It builds your brand. It builds the value of your company. Interbrand does an annual analysis of the great brands of the world, and they identified IBM as the second most valuable brand and the first most valuable brand from the standpoint of citizenship. So citizenship produces economic return. You get the best talent. In our case, the best innovation. Socially responsible investment funds invest in you. You build the quality of your brand, and you invest heavily, and you get results for your investments. So your social activity and your social performance and your business performance are not separate. They're together. Rosabeth Kanter at the Harvard Business School wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review about the IBM approach, and she titled it From Spare Change to Real Change. And the spare change approach, common among a lot of companies, is you make a lot of money and you owe some of your spare change. and the goal is be generous. But generous isn't enough. You really should have a goal of being effective at what you do. And the real change approach is not to take the thing that you don't need, your spare change, take your core business assets, your technology in our case, your talent, your innovation, your ability to resolve critical problems for your clients, and use that real change approach to making a big impact on society. And I'll give you a couple of specific examples. I mentioned earlier the creation of the IBM Corporate Service Corps. This is a program that our CEO announced in July of 2007. Each year, we select 500 of our top emerging leaders in the company. And their leadership training program is to form them into teams of 10, 6 to 10 really, and assign them into geographies in the developing world to work together, live together, and solve a societal problem. We've had about 1,000 of our top leaders through this program. We've sent 100 teams. A team, if it were billable, would be a $250,000 team. So in this period, about $25 million worth of talent have been sent to 22 countries in the developing world. One example, a team went to Cross River Province in Nigeria, and they developed Project Hope and Comfort, which is free health care for poor women and children in Cross River Province in Nigeria. It also is a cash payment system and an education system. In the last year, it served 17,500 poor women and children in Nigeria. And that's an example of what the team did. On the ground, what they also learned was enormously beneficial for the company. They advanced their teaming skills. A team consists of people from a variety of different countries. The skills on a team, software developers, researchers, business process consultants, marketing people, communications people, legal people, finance people. And a team doesn't stay in a hotel, they live together. They work 24/7. In terms of its leadership development opportunity and capability, premier. To the point now 6 other companies, or many of our clients, are starting programs modeled after the Corporate Service Corps. I had an opportunity to speak at the 50th anniversary of the Peace Corps. And I said that the Peace Corps is a fabulous concept, and it excited and energized generations of Americans. But that was a concept of taking the best of America and bringing it someplace else. The Corporate Service Corps, about 25% of the people in Corporate Service Corps at IBM are from the US. They're from every country. They have every skill. It's not about bringing IBM or bringing the United States problem-solving talent. It's about creating global teams and bringing that talent into places that desperately need it to grow their economy, to build economic activity. A second example is in education. I talked to you about the Reading Companion, voice recognition technology. We've also created high-quality early childhood learning centers and contributed 50,000 of them around the world. 10 million children ages 3 to 7 got an early start in their education as a consequence of the education activity. And being willing to stand up for major policy changes, like sponsoring the Education Summit in '96 and 2 other education summits at IBM afterwards. Those are examples. The World Community Grid, making a difference in AIDS research and cancer research. These are critical examples that demonstrate how corporate citizenship and corporate responsibility and business activity are joined within the company. And the view of the company is that business strategy and citizenship aren't separate. If you look at the IBM business strategy, it's pretty clear. Business analytics, cloud computing, growth markets, smarter planet. It's not a secret. You can read about it in all the business pages. Every one of those concepts ties to our citizenship strategy. After the earthquake and the tsunami in Japan, we deployed what we call disaster relief in a box, an open source solution hosted on a cloud, used by all the prefectures to reunite families, to coordinate relief activities, and that's an example of cloud computing. Business analytics, We've created a free site on the web called City Forward to help cities plan their strategies. So in terms of going forward on citizenship, I think the critical thing is how do you embed those solutions in your business, and how do you offer those solutions and opportunities to the next generation, people like yourself in business schools, to understand that you have an opportunity to be a business leader or a leader in the voluntary sector or a leader in the government sector. I've worked in all of them in my career, and they desperately need forward-thinking leaders who understand how societal problems get solved. Not by business operating alone, not by government operating alone, not by the voluntary sector operating alone, and expecting from whatever enterprise you work for, whether it's a business or government or a voluntary entity, expecting a high level of performance, which includes meeting your business goals, but also meeting your social or societal goals. So if you're seeking a private sector career, wherever you wind up, I hope you wind up at IBM, talk to your employers about their citizenship activity. They will listen to the top talent in their company, talking to them about how they measure their environmental performance, whether or not they're dedicating resources and getting return in social investments. And as an individual, embrace the same notions that we talked about a high-quality enterprise. Be willing and ready to change. Be aggressive about your interests in social engagement. Change is critically important, but don't ever, ever give up on the critical values that are important to you. Trust, personal responsibility, and being willing not only to have a successful business career, and I hope you all who are future business leaders have that goal, but understand that being an important civic leader and having a strong sense of citizenship is how one becomes an important business leader in the 21st century. Thank you very much.